go to traffic school for a year straight on Saturdays for 8 hours. And that was very tough, just mentally, after, working all week. So, and when you came out of nursing school, was it in nursing school you discovered ICU, critical care, ER? What was it, a personality type kind of match? Because I'm a firm believer that there are personality types in every category of nursing for the most part. How did it come to you?
I actually was very fortunate. I kind of fell into a job as a physician scribe in the emergency department. So some facilities utilize this service where they literally have somebody walking around with a laptop following the emergency physician all around and doing the bulk of their documentation so that they're able to see more patients and not be so bogged down with all of the computer charting. So that was wonderful. I was in that role for, I would say, 3 years. Like the majority of the time I was in nursing school, and it was fantastic because though it wasn't a clinical role and I couldn't handle or do anything with the patient, I was there in the room. I got to see all of the things happening in the emergency department at a what's called a level 2 trauma facility. So, and it was the only facility within quite a wide radius. So it was very busy, high acuity. I saw so many things, and the physicians there really loved to teach. Most of the people who worked that job as scribes were in school of some sort. We had a couple of physical therapists. Most people were getting ready to go to med school. So all of us were really eager to learn, and the docs were great, and that was phenomenal. And then the taste of the energy of the ER, I was like, oh, this is for me. Right. I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie.
Right. If you know, you know. And what a great experience to be a scribe, because you really do get to see so much. And in a trauma center ER, can you explain to listeners and the viewers the categories of trauma center, what those levels mean? Really quickly.
Well, I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but a level 1 facility is that's a facility that has all of the different types of doctors that you need for any kind of major incident. I mean, you're talking like organs and bones mashed up in a bad car accident. Not every doctor can fix that. Not every facility can handle that. So a level 1 takes everybody. That's typically in your area. You'll hear if somebody has some sort of bad traumatic injury, they'll get flown often from their hospital to another hospital. They're going to a level 1 center.
These are like burn centers, can take, really kind of, I don't know, the unique injury type of injuries.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And very, very medically complex with many, many organ systems involved. So a level 2 center means that they don't meet some of the criteria. Specifically, the facility that I was at didn't have any brain surgery capabilities. I believe that was the only criteria they didn't meet. So every other complex case we handled right there. It stayed there. It was brought there. But anything brain related, had to go. And then level 3 is more of like typically rural hospitals where they have basic resources in the emergency department, but not all of the more intricate things that you need, again, to handle those very detailed multi-organ traumas.
Mm-hmm. And that's a little knowledge nugget too for those people listening and watching, is find out what the trauma center is closest to you and what level it is, and where would the level 1 be? Because I know there are certain states, I want to say Idaho or a couple states up in that area, where you have to go to Colorado. There may not be, so if you're living in a remote area, you might just be far away from any hospital. And not every hospital has trauma standing, I guess is what I want to say. I'm not sure if it's certification. The hospital I worked at was a trauma center, and then in the fight to be the trauma center, we lost trauma so entirely. We just lost it all. So it kind of got boring. It was super exciting when I first worked there, and then kind of became a little run of the mill. And so it's really important to know where those hospitals are, where are you going, what are the trauma centers, and that also defines how The EMTs are routed, the ambulances are routed. There's a whole thing that's going on in the ER of orchestrating all the ambulances and working with other hospitals as well to make sure that, there's a bed, there's availability, there's resources, and that patients get to the right place. So you started out in ER, and not every ER nurse is drawn to the ICU.
So the facility that I was at, I wasn't able to get a job there as a new nurse. They had it was interesting the way they lined up their program, but anyways, I I got a job as on the floor, it was a step down unit as my first RN job. And so that unit is for people who they're coming out of ICU, they're still have some things going on. They may need medications running to keep their heart rate or blood pressure under control or something like that. But they're more stable than they would be in intensive care. They're breathing on their own. We're not, these are not patients that you're typically concerned, may go into a respiratory or cardiac arrest where they stop breathing or their heart stops. So these are people who are more well, but still require quite a bit of resources. Right. That's also the floor that if the ICU is short a nurse and can't bring in an ICU nurse, they'll pull a nurse from step down, because again, those nurses typically have a bit more of a skill set than a med surge, or you would say the regular floor. Mm-hmm. So I got pulled over to ICU a few times when they were short staffed, and I really enjoyed it. And that was my first experience with intensive care. And I actually got recruited over there. So I only was out on the step down unit for 6 or 7 months as a new grad. And then I transitioned over to intensive care.
So you started, when you were step down, ICU, and then ER was so that
Yep. And then after I was in the ICU for about a year, I cross-trained into a position that my facility called Critical Care Flex. So I cross-trained down to the ER, because a lot of the things in ICU, a lot of the skill set there really is applicable in the emergency setting as well. And then there's just more things that you have to learn in the emergency setting too. So
self-defense, how to run, psychiatric patients. There's a lot. It's a different, I don't know a lot of ICU nurses who've made that transition to ER. I've known a lot of
it's very rare. Right. Typically, probably nurses listening will laugh, because often, the jokes and memes in the nursing world are how ER and ICU is at each other's necks and couldn't be more different.
Right. And you have patient loaded. Typical ICU ratio for nurse to patient is going to be a 1 nurse to 2 patients, or 1 to 1 even. In ER, it's typically 4. These days it could be 6, 8. Who knows? It could be 10. It could be very dangerous level of staffing. And you're at the front door of the hospital, so you're really getting everything, and it can be a little bit chaotic versus the ICU, which is
a bit chaotic.
which is a very controlled environment. The ICU. I'm not saying ICU nurses are wound tight. I'm just saying the ICU nurses are very, very organized, and the level of teamwork is pretty amazing. It's people really, it's the expectation everybody's going to help each other. Patient comes on the floor. I worked in a post-heart unit, so I worked step down. We had codes all the time. It was like a whole thing. Until we started the RRT system, which then kind of caught those changes early. But right out of nursing school, I was able to exercise my background and as a weightlifter, and really do chest compressions constantly and run faster than I ever thought my body could move or run. It's very interesting that you went that direction. And so how long did you stay in the ER?
So I've been doing that for, 5 years now, back and forth between ER and ICU, just depending on staffing, really.
Gotcha. So you really found that to be kind of your home.
Yeah, I mean, because there's things that I like about both, and there's things that I don't like about both, and it's really nice to have the flexibility to go back and forth. And then
Yeah.
because I have the floor experience too, at my facility, if the ER is staffed and the ICU is staffed, sometimes I'll go fill holes on the floor, or sometimes I'll just be the float resource and run around the hospital helping everybody everywhere.
Wow, that's
I'm
awesome.
really your whatever you need nurse.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah, we had some really tight floating clusters, so we didn't float to ICU, but several of us did cross train right before I left. But then we had no patients. Our census was so low, they could not get us into our training, our clinicals, which was just bizarre. And this was right before COVID in 2019. And it was just a very slow summer of nobody being in our hospital. Plus, because we weren't a trauma center, we didn't get those kind of patients, which would typically fill an ICU or give the ICU some interesting flavor as far as patients. So how long in total have you been working bedside?
A little over 8 years as a nurse, and then, like I said, I had that the ER experience for 3 years prior to that as well.
Oh, that's great. And then at what point did you discover or find out about patient advocacy, private patient advocacy, and kind of dive into that and being an entrepreneur and everything that includes, which that's a lot.
Oh yeah. So I started to open the lid on the entrepreneurial box about 3 years ago, and I dipped and dabbled with some things. Never really found the thing that was going to work for me. But I have a philosophy: you have to try on plenty of shoes before you decide to buy a pair.
Right.
And
Yeah.
everything that I tried, every business venture that didn't turn out, every website domain that I have bought, I'm like single-handedly keeping that segment of Google in business, I think. I learned something from all of them. So I really don't look at that time negatively. But I found independent patient advocacy really only about 9 months ago. And once I found out about it, first of all, I was like, oh my God, that is literally, I said, that is a job made for me. I said, I have been fiercely advocating for my patients, in between titrating critical drips. I said, you mean I can do just that? That would be great. And then I found out very quickly